How we doing? Welcome back. Welcome back to our last week of. There we go. Welcome to our last week in Unit 11. Just a few more weeks of school before we're out of here. Just crazy. Um, you saw that final exams are going to be waived. There's a real concern about um, just each course's ability to create and implement a test that was going to be um, fair, manageable, representative, secure in our current situation. So I think um, we believe in doing hard things. I know this has been challenging for many, and yet a worthwhile challenge. Um, and all of us have had different experiences in this season. So it's not. I don't think that we have shrunk back from seeking an appropriate challenge, but we were worried. We were concerned about test security and creating meaningful high stakes. Final exam is essentially high stakes, a meaningful exam experience for us. I was just concerned about that, questions about that. I felt that it was a thing that we could have done in our circumstance, but wasn't necessarily something that every course felt comfortable doing. So no final exam, but that does mean that your unit exams mean more. It means that your quarter scores mean more. So um, these last 3-4 weeks are going to matter a lot. So make sure you're using your planner. Plan out your hours. And this is probably a discussion that we should have had sort of right at the beginning. I apologize that we didn't have it. Hopefully, other teachers or you sat down with your parents and sort of thought through this. Um, you're getting a schedule from me every week. Hopefully, you're getting a schedule from all of your teachers every week. Sit down, write it out. Sit down, write out what happens has to happen Monday, what has to happen Tuesday, what has to happen Wednesday, what happens has to happen Thursday, and what has to happen Friday, and then well what has to happen on Saturday. Anything. Um, uh, there's a possibility that you have in some ways less to do now, and yet with the amount of sort of unstructured time that you have, there's a real challenge that while in having maybe less to do, you feel like um, that work is always there. You can't escape the stress. So set up a schedule, know when you're going to do what, know what has to be done, get that done so that you can feel free to go and do whatever you want. Go for a run, uh, uh, Skype with friends, or FaceTime with friends, play your video games, get that 2K, or watch your Netflix or your Hulu. Um, so be mindful of the deadlines. Please, please, please be careful to meet them. It's going to go better for you, and like I have at least tried to spread things out so the portions are manageable. So let's enough just sort of thinking about what we have going on. Let's jump into our lesson for today. Today, we're going to be looking at divorce. What is legal grounds for divorce? What does the Old Testament say about it? What does Jesus say about it? How are those interconnected? Now, ideally, within Christianity, within Judaism, the goal is not to divorce, which we'll see Jesus mention, and I think that idea of love God, love your neighbor is going to be the foundation for how we view marriage. And there's some great resources available to you in terms of thinking about marriage. But here we want to deal with a particularly difficult one that has caused a great deal of stress um, in the American experience and even the European experience over the last 100 years or so. So we want to jump into it. It's a difficult one, and one that Jesus steps into, and there's even been a significant difficulty in understanding Jesus with it. So without further ado, let's jump into our commitment to God and our memory verse, and then we'll jump into Deuteronomy. Okay. Let's see. All right, let's begin. Shema, Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, v'ho levavka, uvaho nafsheha, uvaho meodeha, ve'ahavta lereaha kamoka. Amen. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Love your neighbor as yourself. Escucha, oh Israel, el Señor es nuestro Dios, el Señor uno es. Amarás al Señor tu Dios con todo tu corazón, con toda tu alma y con toda tu fuerza, que amarás a tu prójimo como a ti mismo. Amen. So let's pray. God, we're entering into a text that's difficult. For some of us, deeply personal. For others, maybe not so much. And yet, God, it's something that affects the lives of people all around us. So, God, we ask for your help and your wisdom in approaching this with grace and with love. So, God, may we just grow in this season of social distancing to love you with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind, to love our neighbors as ourselves. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Oh, what am I doing? Our memory verse this week is Deuteronomy 30:1-2. It says this. See, I'm desperately out of practice apparently. And when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and you return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I command you today with all your heart and with all your soul. That's our memory verse for this week. Okay. Now, Deuteronomy 24 is the central text in all the Bible. All the rest of the passages about divorce come from this Deuteronomy 24 text, and there's one central question which we want to address in it. Okay, so it says this. It says, when a man takes a wife and marries her, if uh, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house. And if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter man dies, who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled. For that is an abomination before the Lord. You shall not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. Much to deal with in this passage to understand it rightly. But the key question concerning divorce, and we talk about divorce because, well, in part, 50% of marriages in the United States, maybe it's slightly more than that, now it's like 51% of marriages in the United States, end in divorce. Okay. So and we find that in the church, those who at least identify as Christians, the percentages are very, very similar. So what do we make of that? Is that the way it's supposed to be? Certainly. When you go to a ceremony and they say something like to have and to hold, sickness and unhealth, rich or poor, till death do us part, you you gotta think like, if that's the vow that's being made, either we shouldn't be making that vow, or two, that something is going terribly, terribly wrong in our marriages if 50% of them don't end in death. And again, that sounds dark, but don't end the way they're supposed to, end instead in divorce. So, what makes one legal? How do we know if we're getting this right? Okay, especially within the church, right? Well, it all centers around this. If she finds no favor in his eyes because he found some indecency in her. Now, just take note, um, all over the Old Testament, commands are given in like the masculine gender, right? If you study Spanish, you know that words have gender. Not always relating to like physical gender, like door is feminine and whatever. Um, Not always related to like human gender or mammal gender, but words are gendered. Here we do have an issue of like human gender. Commands are given in the masculine unless they're like particular to women. Okay, so you do get commands to women, but in general, commands are given concerning the man. But the assumption here is that if it said something like a man shall not commit murder, it doesn't mean a woman can, right? It's also true that a woman should not commit murder, right? So while it says here, if he finds some indecency in her, it could just as easily say, if she finds some indecency in him. So this goes both ways. Both parties in a marriage covenant are permitted to seek a divorce according to this text. And the divorce must be sort of certified by a certificate. Like there's a legal document. It may not be a legal document to say one is getting married, to review that in a minute. But there is a legal document that says you're divorced. Does that make sense? Um, so the question is, like the critical question here is, what does indecency mean? And this question rages for thousands of years. What does indecency mean? Well, the answer to the question again has been central in both the Christian and the Jewish concern about divorce for thousands of years. And so Jesus is going to step into this question. He's going to step into this question as it's already raging in his world. Okay. And here, just really briefly, there's two main schools of Pharisee thought. You remember the Pharisees, if you've read the New Testament, are major players in the world of Jesus's day, right? Um, you hear in Jesus's world in the first century in Israel, you have essentially four main groups. You've got Pharisees, who are your but you've got Pharisees who are extremely religious for reasons we'll talk about a little bit more in Unit 12. Then you have the Sadducees who have all the power. They run the temple. Some of them very, very devout. Also, some of them, because the nation is ruled by Rome and they run the temple, uh, because there's an interconnectedness there between religion and the politics of the day, the ruling body of the day. Some of them deeply, deeply corrupt, right? Then you have Essenes who are again cult might be too strong of a word, but they're a separatist group. They're like the doomsday preppers, if you will. And of like the Jewish world, extremely religious. They tend to go hide in the desert. And then you've got the zealots, and the zealots are basically your extremists. They're your terrorists. Their vision of God's kingdom is kill the Romans. The Pharisees are a little bit more on the like progressive end of things. They were very popular. They were sort of main. They were far more mainstream than the other three. Most people in most synagogues, I think, were at least loosely Pharisee in the ancient world. But the Pharisees had like sort of like we do multiple denominations. There's many groups, and they all centered around particular rabbis. And there's two main schools of rabbis. There's the Hillel Pharisees, and they're pretty. Maybe we would say they're sort of liberal. Jesus agrees with Hillel. Where there's interaction between Jesus and Hillel, Jesus agrees with Hillel on basically everything except for one key issue. Okay, just note that. Then there's the Shammai Pharisees, who are they're sort of the real conservative end of Pharisee. And Jesus is going to disagree with them a vast majority of the time, except on one key issue. Okay? And uh, both Hillel and Shammai Pharisees weigh into this question of what does indecency mean. Hillel says something along the lines of indecency, it's could be anything. Man doesn't like her anymore. She burned his breakfast. She, you know, gained too much weight. Whatever. He finds her indecent. He's the head of the household. He has the right to divorce her. Um, the Shammai Pharisees said, no, 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 no. You cannot. Decency is sexual immorality. Decency is sexual immorality, and only sexual morality. Okay, so what do we do with this? Can you divorce for any reason you want, or can you only divorce because of sexual morality? Let's wait. Let's see where Jesus weighs in on this for us. Two key passages from the Gospel of Matthew concerning um, divorce. First comes in Matthew 5, part of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. Here, quoting Deuteronomy. Right? But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay. So what's happening here? What Jesus, maybe it's clear to you already. What's the one issue where Jesus agrees with Shammai and disagrees with Hillel? It's this one. Jesus says right at the get-go, like the reason that justifies divorce is sexual morality. Okay, so why? How does that work? What's this about? Well, remember the structure of marriage. Marriage is a two-part covenant. It starts with the legal or the verbal, the family, the community agreement, an agreement between families, or like in our case, maybe more like individuals, which is made known to the public today, and would today be would include a legal marriage license from the state. So when you get married, you go to the courthouse, you go to City Hall, you get a marriage license from the state, which you then submit to the state, and they file saying legally you're married. Now you can file taxes together and blah 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 blah. So uh, um, to um, the first thing that should happen in a marriage or in seeking a marriage is that the families to come together and there's an agreeing that these two people should be married. Now, for us, we would call that like engagement, right? In their world, at the point of engagement, you became legally married. You went to the courthouse, you got the document, you signed it, you turned it in. You're legally married, but you haven't had the wedding feast yet, and you haven't consummated the wedding. You haven't become fully married yet. You're just sort of legally married, but in a state of what we would call like limbo. Uh, we might call this betrothed. We don't really English doesn't really have a word for this season, but it's a legal situation in ancient Israel. Okay. The second portion of the covenant, the thing that makes you fully married, where the signing of the document only makes you like a little bit married, or sort of legally married. What makes you fully married is the signing of the physical covenant, which is sex. Right? Sex is the covenant consummation, or the covenant signing act. It initiates the one flesh bond, or the one flesh union that makes people fully married before God. Right? It says, "A man shall leave his father and his mother, and become one flesh with his wife." Right? To become one. Um, like we said, I think we said this earlier. In the Bible, there's no such thing as premarital sex. All all sex is marital. All sex is either covenant making or covenant breaking. Either you're in violation of covenant or you're establishing one. Okay, so as we saw with like Shechem and Dinah, you can get these mixed up. You can initiate the physical covenant first. You shouldn't, but in their world, the right response would then be to get married. And what we see in ancient Near Eastern culture is that if sex happens, and the families don't agree to the marriage, now the man owes a divorce settlement. He owes the dowry as the divorce settlement. Okay. Again, there's a real concern to protect women in how this is set up. Um, Maybe not. We might look at some of the practices of the ancient Near East and think these are sort of oppressive to women. I think there's some real protection here that is missing in our culture. Okay. Um, Not to say that the ancient Near Easterners got it like necessarily better or absolutely right, but there is some real protection here for women that we should be more concerned about. Okay, so it's a two-part covenant. So Jesus says, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Or it was said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, everyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So here, Jesus is arguing that the proper definition of indecency from Deuteronomy 24 is sexual immorality. So why? Well, sexual immorality violates the physical covenant. Okay. If a man is like, I don't want to be married to you anymore, like, get out of here. Here's your certificate of divorce. Say he got a lawyer or a priest or a rabbi or whatever to sort of give him one of these for whatever reason. Or maybe one of these Hillel teachers is, just will give you a certificate of divorce for anything. Jesus says, look, if you get one of these fraudulent, unjust certificates of divorce, then then you go off and get married. You hand your spouse a certificate of divorce for no good reason. You go off and get married. You're committing adultery because that divorce certificate only cancels the legal covenant. The physical covenant is still in play. The physical covenant is still there. That's still binding to God. So if you divorce unjustly, even if you legally divorce unjustly, before God, you're still married. And so if you go off and shack up with someone else, you get married to somebody else, you commit adultery against your spouse. And you're forcing them into a situation where they want to remarry. They're in an adult. Their status is sort of as an adulterer because they're not actually divorced. The legal statement, the legal divorce certificate can only come after a violation of the physical covenant, which is clearly adultery. I had a teacher that argued that abuse, particularly physical abuse, and that abuse, particularly physical abuse and abandonment, uh, would fit under the larger sort of umbrella of sexual morality, and that's debated. It strikes me as right, but I don't know that we want to get into uh, like a fuller argument of that in the time that we have. Clearly, adultery is grounds for divorce. So why? Well, it the divorce is not to enable the adulterer to continue in sin. The divorce is to protect the victim, the spouse who's being cheated on, from the adulterous spouse. So if a man's cheating on his wife, the divorce is a legal protection of the wife, of the family, from the husband who's violating the marriage covenant. Now, there's no command that says you have to get divorced in this situation. There's no command that says if he repents and ends the relationship and comes back to the family that you can't take him back. You absolutely can. That's a right and good thing. But there's also a rightness to say, no, he's not repenting. He has violated the marriage covenant. He is now if you violate the covenant, that's a sort of that. I don't mean to overstate, but that's a danger to the family. Threatens the livelihood of the family, threatens the emotional and spiritual well-being of the family. It's okay to it's even right to divorce that person because they violated the marriage covenant. It's divorce functions as a protection against a protection or a just recourse for a violation that's already happened. Does that make sense? Um, a second related passage again from the Gospel of Matthew, here from Matthew 19. A Pharisee, notice Pharisee, okay, came up to him and tested Jesus. And this is a respectful thing. If you respect someone, if you respect a teacher, you put them to the test. Can you really answer my tough questions? Notice he's coming to Jesus, I think, very reverently. He is not trying to trap him here. This is what rabbis and their students, their disciples, do. Tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" He answered him, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female?" Look, you were created from the beginning, male and female. It's not up to you. It's how you're created. Sorry. And he said to them, "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." So, from the beginning, the design for humanity was gendered, male and female, sexed, male and female, and with the design that those two would become one flesh in marriage. So they are, Jesus goes on, verse 6. So they are no longer two, but one. One flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. That bond of marriage is holy. It's sacred. It ought to remain forever. Okay, for till death do us part, as we say. And they said to him, "Why then?" He asked him a follow-up question. So, okay, you sound like a conservative. Again, the guy's question sounds a little bit like Hillel, right? It says, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery." Okay. Tons of questions here and deep confusion in the American church regarding this. Okay. So what's the question? Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Now, this might be surprising to you. Maybe you've never heard this passage. Maybe you've never heard this question before. But there's a real question as to what this means. There's two ways of taking it, at least two ways, uh, which I've encountered. Okay. Um, the first is there any reason at all? I don't think there is, but is there any reason at all that makes divorce lawful? There's a ton of people that take this passage this way. Is there any reason at all that divorce could be lawful? And sort of the assumption of the question is no. And people will read Jesus as saying, no, there's not any reason. Um, and I think this is the correct response. This is the correct reading because it fits the context. It would be odd for Jesus to be asked, "Is there any reason that makes divorce justified?" Um, what would be more fitting from our understanding of Hillel and Shammai and what the Pharisees were discussing and debating is divorce lawful for any old reason? She burnt my eggs for my breakfast, therefore I'm justified in seeking divorce. Is that how it's set up? So I think this Pharisee coming from the Hillel school sees Jesus agreeing with Hillel on a vast number of issues. They weren't the same, but they were very, very similar, right? Seeing them agree, he says, can I seek a divorce for any reason? And Jesus goes, no, you can't. Only on the grounds of sexual immorality can you seek a divorce. Okay? So, the question in this passage, the Pharisee comes up and says, can I seek a divorce for any reason? Is it lawful for any reason? Jesus says, no, for sexual immorality only. That's what indecency means. Um, so we follow up question. Well, why then did Moses command give her a certificate of divorce and send her away? Here, Jesus's answer is interesting and a little bit perplexing, right? He says, um, because and here's the question: what does it mean when Jesus says, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives"? And this is, I think, in the American tradition that I grew up around, this was taken in a particular way, which I think is fundamentally flawed. The way this is taken is that God is giving into Israel's sinful desire to divorce. You wanted to divorce so bad, God said, "Okay, fine. Here's what you have to do. If you want to sin by divorcing, here's how you do it. Okay, just go ahead." Now, is that a thing God does? Does God give into our sinful desires and make them lawful? May it never be. It'd never be that God would say, "Okay, well, if you're going to keep sinning, here's how you do it right." What the? No! Goodness. May it never be. God is not here saying, "Well, Israel, you wanted to sin so bad, so I'm going to let you do it." No, that violates God's holiness. Good grief. Um, so what does it mean? I think it means that God is giving a legal means of protection to those whose spouses would commit acts of adultery. So what's the hardness of heart here? The hardness of heart is that, well, Moses is allowing divorce because people are committing adultery. People are abandoning their spouse. People are beating abusing their spouse. Therefore, um, uh, because your hearts are hard, because you don't love your spouse well, because you're in other sin, there's a necessity to protect victims. So therefore, divorce must be. Does that make sense? It drives me crazy when people are like, "Well, God said, we were just we just wanted to sin so much, we could get divorced." Ugh. And I think we do ourselves a great disservice when we look at the divorce stats and go, those people are really, really bad sinners because they're seeking divorce." Now, there's something to that, but in reality, uh, before we even get to that 50% statistic, there's a question or concern, like, uh, why are people getting divorced? Like, if that 50% of people in the church are getting divorced because one of the spouses was committed adultery, then we don't have a divorce problem. We have an adultery problem, right? We don't have a divorce problem. We have an adultery problem. Say people shouldn't get divorced. Yeah, but people shouldn't commit adultery. Second question then, or the second issue here is, if we look at that 50% stat concerning divorce, and we find that a large number aren't related to adultery or abuse or abandonment, I think there is a significant portion that is. If the question is like, well, like, if they're getting divorced for reasons that are unjust, then we have a marriage problem. People don't know what it means to be married. Does that make sense? If we're just hopping in and out of marriages, then we're there. Then there's real sin here because we've not understood what marriage is. Statistics say that people who are in an unhappy marriage, let's say not involving abuse, emotional, physical, spiritual, people in an unhappy marriage, if they stick it out and work on that marriage, seek to learn to communicate better, seek to forgive, seek to understand and love and communicate, and serve one another. After 5 years, that marriage typically turns into one that's happy. If we say, "I'm going to divorce because I'm unhappy," we are missing um, both the meaning of marriage and the opportunity to enjoy a marriage that's really happy. Um, uh, so if I don't think that we have I don't think that we have a divorce problem in the United States. I think we have an adultery problem, probably and an abuse problem. We also have an understanding of marriage problem. Ultimately, what we have is a problem. The problem in marriage that precipitates in divorce is selfishness. We are living selfishly, not selflessly. If we in the church sought to live selflessly, I think our divorce rate would plummet. Okay, so Jesus says, "Look, your hardness of heart, it's your adultery, it's your selfishness, not the seeking of divorce. At least not primarily, right?" So Um, he says, I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. So here we have Jesus saying what I had said before. Is this a commandment against remarriage? Well, no, it's a commandment against unlawful divorce. If you say to your wife, you can't cook, here's a divorce, get out of my face. I'm gonna go marry someone that can cook. You find someone that can cook, you marry her, you're committing adultery. Because that legal document is meaningless unless there's a violation of the physical covenant has been violated. Your one flesh union is still in place, and you go marry someone else. Now you're violating to consummate that marriage. You're violating your previous one. So you're committing adultery. Okay. So really, at the foundation of this is what does it mean? What does it mean to have to be in a covenant? And maybe you've been at a wedding where that the bride or groom, he's been married 3 or 4 times, she's been married. This is her second marriage, and they stand up there and they say, "For richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, till death do us part." You just sort of sit there going, "Really, really? It can't be this way, saints." And the problem isn't divorce. The problem is, are we loving? Are we living selflessly? Um, and are we living faithfully to our spouse? Faithfulness to our spouse means in sickness and health, in richer for poor, better for worse, happy or unhappy. We're going to love God and love our spouse well, not seek to get out at the drop at any time something goes wrong. And if things are unhappy, that means you got work to do. And probably you ought to, right at the beginning, seek wise counsel from people in your church. Guys, often as men, we're hesitant to ask for help. If you're having issues with your marriage, ask for help. And this really impacts how you go about dating. Don't date in isolation. Always date with an older couple you both trust or you both can trust, involved in your marriage. Might be a parent, might be parents, might not be. Maybe it's better to have sort of a neutral couple from your church, an older couple, maybe more like your grandparents' age, that can look into your life and go, "You're not communicating here. You're not listening. You're not listening. You're not being mindful of his needs," etc. Okay. You need wise counsel. You don't know enough at your age. Okay, you'll probably never know enough to pick a spouse by yourself. You need the input of your family. You need the input of trusted advisors. Look, not your friends. They're not any wiser than you. Some of them might be, but look, you need older people in your life to give you guidance, not just in who you date or who you marry, but in how you live out your marriage. Okay. All right. Well, that wraps our unit. I love you guys. And we've got a unit test at the end of this week. Okay. So study up. Quizzes is up. What's on the test is up. Uh, take a good hard look at the notes, and come ready on Friday. Love you. God bless you. Have a great day. See you later.